At 44 years old, Michael thought he had done everything right. For 15 years, he played it safe. Same company, same desk, same quiet belief that loyalty would eventually pay off. Every morning looked almost identical. He'd walk into the office a little before 9, coffee in one hand, laptop bag on his shoulder. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. And honestly, Michael liked it that way. No risky career moves, no big gambles, just steady progress. To him, that was what responsible adulthood looked like. A stable job, a predictable routine, a future that felt secure. For 15 years, he believed he was making the smartest decision a man could make. But here's the thing, no one tells you about stability. Sometimes it's not real. Sometimes it's just something that hasn't broken yet. And on one ordinary Monday morning, Michael opened an email that would prove exactly that. A short message, just a few sentences. But those sentences erased 15 years of certainty. And in that moment, Michael realized something many men don't understand until it's far too late. Choosing safety for too long can become the biggest risk of all. If you're a man over 40, this story might feel familiar, not because the details are the same, but because the feeling is. There's a moment many men reach somewhere in their 40s. Life looks fine on the outside. You have a job, responsibilities are handled, bills are paid. From the outside, everything looks stable. But inside, something feels different. Not broken, just stuck. The routine that once felt comfortable starts to feel heavy. The career that once felt secure starts to feel fragile. And sometimes the hardest part isn't failure. It's the quiet question that slowly appears in the back of your mind. What if the life I built isn't as stable as I thought? Most men don't talk about that question. They ignore it. They keep going. And that's exactly what Michael did. For years. Until the morning that question finally answered itself. Michael joined the company when he was 29. At the time, it felt like a win. Good salary, decent benefits, a clear career path. Nothing flashy, but stable. And for a man approaching 30, stability felt like success. The first few years moved quickly. Promotions came slowly, but they came. The salary increased a little every year, not enough to change his life overnight, but enough to make him feel like things were moving forward. Michael bought a small house, then a slightly better car. Nothing extravagant, just the kind of life most people would call responsible. And year by year, his routine became predictable. Wake up, drive to work, sit at the same desk, work on the same systems, solve the same kinds of problems. At first, the routine felt comforting. And there's a certain peace that comes with knowing exactly what tomorrow will look like. But routines have a quiet side effect. They slowly stop you from noticing change. Technology was evolving. The industry was shifting. New skills were becoming valuable. But none of that felt urgent to Michael, because from where he was sitting, everything still looked fine. The paycheck arrived on time. The office was still open. His job still existed. And when life appears stable long enough, the human brain makes a dangerous assumption. It assumes tomorrow will look exactly like today. Michael believed that too, for 15 years. But the truth about stability is simple. It only feels permanent until the day it suddenly isn't. And Michael was about to discover that the hard way. The signs didn't appear all at once. They never do. At first, the changes were small, almost invisible. A department quietly disappeared. A few coworkers were suddenly no longer with the company. Michael noticed it. Of course he did. But like most people, he explained it away. Companies restructure sometimes. Things will settle down, and life continued. Same desk, same login screen, same routine. A year passed, then another change happened. A new software system replaced work that once took an entire team. Tasks that used to require experience were now handled automatically. Michael noticed that too. But again, it didn't feel urgent because his job still existed. And when your paycheck still arrives every 2 weeks, it's easy to believe everything is fine. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Human beings are incredibly good at ignoring slow change, especially when acknowledging it would force us to change our lives. The industry around Michael was evolving. New tools, new systems, new skills becoming valuable. Younger employees arrived with knowledge he didn't have. Different experience, different training. Michael saw it happening. But every time the thought crossed his mind, he told himself the same thing many people do. I've been here too long to worry about that. Loyalty felt like protection. Experience felt like security. And the longer things stayed mostly normal, the easier it became to believe that nothing serious would happen. But the most dangerous problems in life rarely arrive suddenly. They grow quietly, slowly, almost politely, until one day, they're impossible to ignore. And by the time Michael finally realized how much the world around him had changed, it was already too late to pretend nothing was happening. The email arrived on a Monday morning. Nothing unusual about that. Michael had opened thousands of emails over the years, most of them routine. Meeting reminders, project updates, internal announcements. Just another normal day. He walked into the office around 8:45. Same hallway, same fluorescent lights, same quiet sound of keyboards tapping. Michael sat down at his desk and opened his inbox. There it was, a message from Human Resources. The subject line was simple. Company restructuring update. At first, he didn't think much about it. Companies restructure all the time. He clicked the email. A short message appeared on the screen. Not long, not emotional. Just a few carefully written sentences. The company was undergoing major structural changes. Several positions would be eliminated. Unfortunately, his role was one of them. Michael read the email once, then again, then a third time, as if reading it more carefully might somehow change the meaning. But it didn't. 15 years. 15 years of showing up early. 15 years of solving problems. 15 years of believing that loyalty created security. All erased in less than a minute. He didn't say anything, didn't argue, didn't make a scene. Michael simply closed his laptop, picked up his bag, and walked out of the office. The parking lot looked exactly the same as it had the day before. Cars parked in neat rows, people walking in with coffee. The world outside had not changed at all, but Michael's world had. He sat inside his car and stared at the steering wheel. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then 20. For the first time in 15 years, he had nowhere to go. And in that quiet parking lot, Michael finally understood something that had been invisible to him for a long time. Stability is a strange illusion, because sometimes the life you think is secure is only one email away from disappearing. For the first few days, Michael told himself it was just a setback. Companies restructure. People lose jobs. It happens. That's what he kept repeating in his mind. But something else was happening too. something much harder to explain. Because losing a job isn't just about money. For many men, it's about identity. For 15 years, Michael had introduced himself the same way. At family gatherings, at social events, at small talk conversations. What do? He always had an answer, a clear one, a stable one. Now suddenly, that answer was gone. The first time someone asked him the question again, Michael hesitated, just for a moment. But that moment felt longer than it should have, because he realized something uncomfortable. For 15 years, his job had quietly become part of who he believed he was. Not just what he did, who he was. And when that job disappeared, a strange emptiness appeared with it. Mornings felt different now. There was no rush to leave the house, no commute, no meetings waiting, just silence. At first, that silence felt peaceful, but after a few days, it started to feel heavy. Michael began waking up later, not because he wanted to, but because there was nowhere he needed to be. And that small change started to bother him more than he expected. Because structure had always given his life direction, now that structure was gone, another uncomfortable thought started creeping into his mind. 44. That number suddenly felt different. When he was younger, 44 sounded experienced. Now it sounded late. Late to change careers. Late to learn something completely new. Late to start over. Michael opened job listings online. Many of them required skills he had never needed before. New systems, new technologies. Things younger candidates seemed to understand naturally. And for the first time in years, Michael felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Uncertainty. Real uncertainty. Not the kind you talk about casually. The kind that quietly sits in the back of your mind at night. The kind that makes you stare at the ceiling longer than usual. Because suddenly a question appears that you can't easily ignore. If the life you built disappears, what exactly do you build next? For many men, this is the moment that hurts the most. Not the layoff, not the email, but the realization that comes afterward. The realization that the thing you trusted for stability was also the thing that slowly stopped you from growing. And Michael was only beginning to understand that lesson. That evening, Michael sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, too quiet. His laptop was still open in front of him, the job listing still glowing on the screen. But he wasn't really reading them anymore. He was thinking. For 15 years, Michael believed he was making the safest decision possible. Stay loyal, work hard, avoid unnecessary risks. That was the formula he trusted. And for a long time, it seemed to work. But sitting there that night, something uncomfortable became impossible to ignore. The safety he had trusted for so long wasn't really safety. It was comfort. And comfort has a quiet side effect. It slowly convinces you that nothing needs to change. Year after year, Michael believed he was protecting his future. But in reality, something else had been happening. His world was moving forward. Technology was changing, industries were evolving, skills were becoming outdated. And while the world was changing, Michael stayed still. That's when the truth finally became clear. For 15 years, he thought he was choosing safety. But safety had quietly become a cage. And cages have one dangerous quality. You usually don't notice them until the door is already locked. Over the next few days, Michael started replaying the past in his mind. Not the good moments, the small signals he had ignored. Looking back, The warning signs had always been there. The industry was changing. New tools were appearing, new systems replacing old ones, new skills becoming valuable. But from where Michael was standing, everything still looked stable. The paycheck kept coming. The office was still open. His desk was still there. And when life appears stable long enough, the brain makes a quiet assumption. It assumes tomorrow will look exactly like today. That assumption is comfortable. And comfort has a dangerous power. It makes slow change feel invisible. The layoffs that seemed small at first. The new technology that didn't feel urgent. The younger employees arriving with skills he never needed before. All of it was happening right in front of him. But comfort makes it easy to delay difficult decisions. I'll learn it later. I'll deal with it when it matters. I still have time. Those words feel harmless when you say them, until the day you realize time has already moved on. Michael wasn't lazy. He worked hard for 15 years. But hard work alone doesn't protect you from change. Sometimes it actually hides it, because when you're busy maintaining stability, you stop preparing for what comes next. And slowly, almost invisibly, the world moves ahead without you. That's when Michael finally understood the lesson that had been waiting for him all along. The biggest risk after 40 isn't failure. It's staying comfortable for too long. But the hardest part of that lesson was still coming. Because understanding the truth is one thing. Figuring out what to do next is something else entirely. Starting again at 44 wasn't inspiring. It was terrifying. For the first few weeks, Michael didn't feel motivated. He felt lost. Every morning, he still woke up early out of habit. But instead of driving to the office, he sat at the kitchen table with his laptop, searching, reading, trying to understand where the world had moved while he was standing still. At first, everything felt overwhelming. New tools, new software, skills he had never needed before. It felt like learning a new language. More than once, Michael almost gave up. Because starting over in your 20s feels exciting. Starting over in your 40s feels uncomfortable. But slowly, something began to change. Michael started taking online courses, not big ones, just small lessons. An hour here, another hour there. At first, it felt awkward, like being a beginner again after years of experience. But every few weeks, something interesting happened. Things started making sense. The new systems weren't impossible. They were just unfamiliar. Michael also started reaching out to old contacts, former colleagues, people he had worked with years ago. One small conversation turned into another. Eventually, someone asked a simple question. Could you help us with a short consulting project? It wasn't a full-time job, just a small freelance task. But when Michael finished that project, he noticed something he hadn't felt in a long time: movement. For years, his life had felt stable, but also strangely stuck. Now things felt uncertain, but they were finally moving forward again. And for the first time since that Monday morning in the parking lot, Michael realized something important. Starting over after 40 isn't easy. But sometimes it's the only way life starts moving again. Sometimes Michael wondered what he would say if he could speak to his younger self. Not the 20-year-old version of him, but the man he was at 29. The man who had just accepted that safe job. If he could go back to that moment, the message wouldn't be complicated. Just 3 simple things. Learn new skills earlier, not when life forces you to. But while things still feel stable, don't trust stability blindly, because the world changes faster than comfort allows you to notice. And most importantly, never trade growth for comfort, because comfort feels good in the moment. But growth is what protects your future. And sometimes the lessons we need most are the ones we only understand years too late. Stories like Michael's are more common than most people realize. They just rarely get talked about. Because from the outside, stability looks like success, but life has a way of changing quietly. And sometimes the question appears only after everything shifts. So here's something worth thinking about. If the stability you rely on today suddenly disappeared tomorrow, would you be ready to start again? Or have you been standing still longer than you realize? Life doesn't end at 40, but the illusions often do. The illusion that stability will last forever. The illusion that loyalty guarantees security. The illusion that there will always be more time to change. Sometimes it takes a difficult moment to see those truths clearly. But once you do, the second half of life can become something different. Not safer, but wiser. And if you're navigating this stage of life too, and stories like this resonate with you, this channel was created for men like you.